The people who move up are people who are adamant. They're persistent. They're not afraid to be uncomfortable in an uncomfortable conversation. So I would say always kind of push when you have something, when you've walked around it, this is the right move. I wouldn't say just run everyone over, but definitely make your voice heard over and over again if you have to.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
It's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the lucrative relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving. Today, our guest is Jon Jennings. Here are 3 things you want to know about Jon before we start. He is the managing partner of Jennings Executive Search, a recruiter specializing in pricing. And by the way, he's an official sponsor of this podcast, so thank you, Jon. He was on episode 119 a year ago. So if you want to know about Jon's background and even more about pricing professionals, go check that one out. And he's a huge snow skier, even though he lives and was raised in the South. Go figure. Welcome, Jon.
Hey, Mark. Glad to be here.
Hey, it's going to be fun. Okay, so I asked you back this time because I have been super curious about what's going on in the world of pricing professionals looking for jobs, companies trying to hire pricing professionals. We had a little talk just beforehand. Do you see this market ticking up right now?
Yeah, it's been ticking up. It's running hot.
Running hot. And so do you have any explanations, guesses, what's going on?
Well, there's a lot of things going on that we can see. The number of job openings has increased. A lot of companies, I don't know, it's due to the pandemic caused some things with a delay in M&A activity is one thing. And then it kind of, with low interest rates and a prime market, once we kind of came out of the lockdown, a lot of transactions started happening. And that's created, more and more jobs, more and more strain on consulting. And we're seeing also the e-commerce world kind of had gasoline just poured all over it. And you see kind of that tech boom, which you're seeing the pullback in the stock market a little bit. But what's happening on the ground is a lot more job openings and a fixed supply. There's not more people coming into the market. There's actually less. You had more people kind of retire early through the pandemic. You had people kind of take different career paths, be more entrepreneurial. And now everybody kind of, what happened with M&A there's a stop to M&A activity essentially, and then a massive boom. Same thing happens in hiring. Everyone has a hiring freeze, or, a lot of companies, a majority, go on a hiring freeze during the, especially early stages of the pandemic. And then they release the hiring freeze. Well, a lot of these companies continue to have success. And now they're hiring those recs, and now they have more recs as they continue to grow. And that created a lot of pressure right there, just kind of that increased demand for a short period of time, really messed up supply from a candidate's perspective. So you had people make job moves, and then it just kind of domino effect down the road. And so you have now, I think today there's like 11.2 million job openings and 6.3 million unemployed. And so back in the summer, it was like 10 million openings and 9 or something unemployed, something like that, as from a macro statistic standpoint. And so it just kind of keeps ticking up a little hotter every quarter.
So of those 11.2 million job openings, how many of them are for pricing people?
That's a great question. I wish I had that data for you.
Yeah, so me too. So let's just focus on the company side for a second and trying to hire people. It makes a lot of sense that the first year of the pandemic, people were so uncertain, they just shut down hiring. They said, we're not going to do anything. And then as they said, okay, we're all going to work from Zoom. We still have to have a company. We still have to run. So let's open up recs again. Do you think pricing recs are opening at the same rate, faster or slower than, say, the average employment or opening for these companies?
And this is going to be more of an answer of, I don't have data on this, but just from what I'm seeing, I'm kind of drawing conclusions. And what's really happening in pricing has been happening for a long time, which is it's expanding. There's more jobs in pricing, and kind of separate to the current economic phenomena that we've seen over the last few years. It's been a space that's grown, and now we're maybe seeing more and more pressure on it because, you look at inflation. You've got to be able to grab price in this environment. There's a lot of people are focused on price, and the people who don't have any sophistication on the pricing side are getting railroaded by their competition, and they're it's becoming very apparent that they're having pricing issues. Even some like large Fortune 500 companies that we've talked to. So you're seeing more and more pressure for more analysts and pricing and more leaders. So it's a space that just continues to grow. And in this market, maybe it's growing a little faster, and just because you're seeing such a pressure on it, and there's a lot of openings in pricing, and it's hard to find qualified people for them at the moment.
Yeah, so I would say my business I'm getting way more inquiries than I've ever gotten for the types of work that I do. And I'd have to say the number one reason is every company is trying to figure out how to raise prices.
Yeah.
Every company.
Everyone.
And some may have strategies, some may not care, and they just do it. And so I think that's why I'm getting a ton of inquiries. I think you might see that not only in an increase in job openings, but you might see that in a difference in the job specifications. Do you see that, or have you recognized anything in the job specs you've been seeing that come through?
Well, we've worked roles recently where, look, the previous, we need to be able to grab price right now with inflation. So they're focused on kind of inflationary items and saying this is where we're not having as much success, and they're kind of measuring it. So they're thinking a lot more about their pricing group than maybe they would in the past. And even smaller businesses where owners have been reluctant to kind of really push price increases on their customers because they've got, deep relationships there or whatever. They're kind of now thinking, okay, well, we need a more dynamic pricing strategy. Where before they were like, no, that's, me and Bill go way back. I'm not going to raise price on them. They're like, well, screw that. We need to focus. We need to bring in somebody to help us with this. So that's where I've seen some really increases in change of mentality there.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting, and by the way, I never think of these things ahead of time. It's always these conversations that cause me to think of these things. But what's really interesting about that is for the last 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, we haven't had inflation. Price increases have been minimal. So who out there really understands or has expertise in how to raise prices? It's pretty fascinating. Yeah,
this is a new problem to solve. And there's only so many people that focus on that. And the funny thing is, not to deviate too much, but early in the pandemic, early on, like if you looked at kind of our micro level of what we worked on, what we filled, it was pricing. Because you think about it. During bad times, when you're kind of worried, okay, we need to focus on price. Make sure to protect our margins.
At that point, it was how do we not lower price too much, too fast?
Yeah. So it's extremes is where the pricing people are like the center of the conversation when maybe they should have been all along. And so I think it creates a more of a hyper focus on the vertical.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so I actually started today's podcast off with saying the lucrative relationship between them. And I say that because my guess is pricing people are getting paid a lot more now than they were a year ago. Confirm or deny or elaborate?
Oh, yeah. Across the board. it's everything. I would say it's correlated with kind of finances increased, and a lot of different kind of, marketing functions have increased. and pricing. What pricing's done is it's getting closer to the C-suite. And that's been something that's been more progressing over a decade versus kind of the last couple of years. But I'm seeing the role being elevated, to more of, in some of these large companies. It depends on the title structure, but VP is like the head versus like director or senior director. And so we've seen that evolution, and compensation has definitely increased. One thing that's driving it is a lot of times you want to find a pricing person, you'll look at a management consulting. And we talked about that in the last podcast, as the kind of different types of talent to go after. And the world of consulting has been booming at a multiple versus like, the traditional industry roles as far as the compensation. Like McKinsey, for example, we found out recently, is paying their entry level, no master's degree, 130 base, just first year, fresh out of college. Maybe they did an intern, starting off at 130 base. And then, obviously there's other firms to recruit out of. And we've seen Bain, for example, they've developed a niche pricing group. They didn't have that before. I think it's just been a couple of years old. And BCG McKinsey are doing it. KPMG's doing it. I know all the big four, I think, are having these niche kind of pricing strategy groups. And then you have Simon Kucher's and all the ones that, the firms that people are familiar with, that specialize in pricing, but they've all increased salaries. We're seeing, managers where they traditionally came into some of these boutique firms at out of business school for their MBA, out of like 140, 150 to go to 170, 180. And now sometimes, 190, 210 base. So you see these massive increases. Well, it's got, we have to calibrate our clients. Look, if you want this profile, some of these consultants will take a little bit of a haircut, but they're not traveling as much. So it's not as much of a lifestyle move. So now you got to raise your salary, and it's kind of affecting the entire market from pricing perspective. Whenever these consultants are now they cost for a solid senior manager, like coming into industry as a senior manager, current engagement manager, you've got to pay somewhere between 180 and 210 base now minimum, or before you get them for like 165. And so you're kind of evaluating talent differently, and everything's being pushed up. And so it's, we're seeing kind of heads of pricing at Fortune 500s, jump in from a base perspective into the high 200s, plus, bonus and equity. And sometimes in some cases, low to mid 300s. And so it's, and even, in some cases, even higher, but that's more Fortune 50 than 500.
Sorry, John, I missed what you just said. I was working on my resume.
Yeah.
These are some pretty impressive numbers.
Yeah. And it's well-deserved. A lot of candidates tell me, is there any way I can negotiate if I could just get like 0.5% of my impact, or like 1% of my impact, that can be my bonus? Doesn't work that way yet. But, you talk to people about the impacts they made at organizations, and it's like, 7, 8, 9-figure impacts. And it's like, wow. There's definitely, there's a value conversation to be had there versus costs.
Yeah. And what's so fascinating is you can see those stories over and over again. And yet there are still a lot of companies who don't invest in pricing, which I just find incredible.
Yeah. And it's one thing I understand, there's bans and you got to stay within certain things. You can't have, pricing be, paid way out of whack versus the rest of your org. But I would say in the future, better align it with sales comp versus finance comp, because it's more real impact you can see. It's like a top salesperson's worth every penny you pay them. And top pricing person's worth a multiple of that.
Right. Yeah. So are the requirements changing for pricing people when people are writing job recs?
No.
Mm-mm. Same.
It's, we're having to get more creative on where we go, especially the entry level. There's just not enough people that are skilled in pricing. Because a lot of people in pricing, they started in finance or some marketing role or wherever, even sometimes engineers, came up through operations and migrated to price. And so we're having to, I'm working a number of roles around the manager, kind of heavy senior analyst, or traditionally we go find a lot of people that currently were in pricing. There's just not as much talent out there. So we're having to say, okay, let's be a little more flexible and dive into finance, and pull people that have more traditional finance with maybe some commercial exposure, and coach them up. But yeah, I don't think the requirements of what they're looking for is changing. Maybe the job is changing a little bit. But I like the fittest, I call it fittest athlete search. We just find the person that's most capable and will learn the fastest and can just solve business problems. They'd like to get in the business and figure things out and communicate cross-functionally. Those are the traits I like to look for. You have to learn the rest. But this market's been enabling me to be more of, okay, here's like the fittest athlete for your role versus all the X, Y, and Z that you wanted.
Yeah, so I used to talk a lot about being a pricing champion and what did it take. And I broke it down into three big categories. Those were understanding pricing strategy, of course, understanding data, and then having leadership skills. So I would think that if you could find somebody who was decent at data, right, truly thinking about it and what does it mean, that you could pretty quickly teach them about pricing strategy. Just send them to me. I'll teach them for you. And then the leadership stuff, most tech people struggle with that all the time. And so, it's kind of like finding the right people who are able to talk to people in a tactful way.
Yes, that's 100%. And it's the core, the data analytics piece is kind of the foundation. And then the other pieces you've got to build on top of it. And some people have the muster to kind of get there. And others just, they don't. It's up to kind of us to evaluate if someone kind of has those soft skills and if they're capable of learning them. But really, it's a self-awareness from the employee's perspective of kind of learning those skills. And those are the people that end up being highly successful in pricing. It's like you have to be good at sales. You've got to be good at analytics. You have to wear every hat in the business. You have to be both sides of your brains have to be lit up. You got to have the creative piece too. And that's why I'm fascinated with this space, is all the intricacies of the roles. And, and I was I'm working with a firm they do advertising consulting, think like Mad Men. Yep. And they're, it's tons of creative minds over there. So we're trying to find people that kind of blend in that culture. And what we found is pricing, really, the really good ones have a creative type of mind, not just, they're good at analytics, but they have that creative side turned on and they can communicate very well. So it's like you have to be everything at the same time. And those people are extremely impactful.
Yeah. And so given the conversation we were just having, finding entry-level people, you're probably starting with data analysts from some part of the business, and we find a way to pull them into pricing. And then we coach them up into what does pricing mean. At most companies, most people who work in pricing at a company don't think about pricing the way I think about pricing, right? They think about it from their company's perspective. And so they can get to that point pretty easily. And then those that are willing to learn the soft skills are the ones that are going to get promoted and move up the ranks and have huge impacts in the company. And so that seems to me to make a lot of sense from the way you can do this.
And a lot of analytics people, sales is kind of a dirty word. And I forgot who it was. There was a speaker that came to a client of mine that was talking to all the different employees, and you're selling in everything. Everything is selling, and you're selling your your analysis, even the data speaks for itself, whatever, but you have to articulate the right way that's digestible and understandable, and you got to win that meeting. And that's where you have to sell yourself, your abilities all the time. And people that kind of think that way and think, okay, I need to invest time and energy and really making sure I'm, maximizing my ability to sell, at all levels is, that's really what makes people promotable.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings for when I coach people and they get into this situation where they just have to be right is I ask, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
Great question.
And as long as you focus on the goal, we want to be effective. So I think that's absolutely spot on. What's going on in your world that you see this difference between hybrid, in office, at home? Does that have any influence on the job search today?
Oh yeah, so I've got some clients that are 100% in office, and it's almost like, ooh, that's the outlier now. Versus,
so are they hardest to find client? Are they hardest to find employees for?
I don't know yet. I think so, but there's a segment of people who want to go back. Now, those people also are like 5 days a week. Yeah, I want to go back like 3 or 4. So yeah, those do present a unique challenge now, where before it wouldn't even be a discussion. It was a selling point if it was some remote. If they give 1 day from home, oh my gosh, that was great. Now it's kind of the opposite. But we're seeing the companies, and I don't know what's right here, the companies that are doing more fully remote, we're able to find talent in markets that are cheaper to live in. We can go broad, and it's easier to obtain talent when you're fully remote. It just is. But we're seeing most of the large companies are going to hybrid. Home Depot here just went to 3 days back in. It seems like a lot of the Fortune 500s are kind of doing that model where it's, they're doing the Tuesday through Thursday in office, and you get remote, Monday and Friday. A lot of these organizations, productivity would go up when people are remote. They, kind of works offices in their house. They just work more. It's harder to turn it off. And so we're seeing a lot of the hybrid, but it's going to be a slow transition back to more in office. I mean, I just started a new lease here, and we're the only people on this floor. I'm expanding, and we're like hiring. I like the in office culture. I think there's some things lost. It's harder to learn, especially for lower, entry level. It's harder to, 2 years experience equals maybe 1.25 of in office. Like, you just learn more being in office, especially early on in your career. And that's my opinion. But yeah, I'm seeing it is a detriment for talent acquisition, but maybe there's a long-term win there. It's a balance. I like the hybrid model. I think a lot of companies will end up landing there. And we'll just, we'll see how it shakes out, but it definitely helps with recruitment. I find the fully remote where there's no office presence, there's a segment of people that say, no, I don't want to do that anymore. I need to get out of the house. So both ends of the spectrum, I think, have some limitations.
So for the hybrids, are they requiring you to be in a specific city now?
Yeah, it depends. But yes, essentially. I've got some roles where, okay, you just come up a week out of the month. You can fly in and you'll get like 4 days, come in Monday morning and leave, Thursday evening for, to get those 4 days out of the month to be there, for, meetings and different things and just to show your face. But for the most part, it's, a few days in the office a week. So, you do need to be within a distance that's doable.
Yeah. I remember from most of my career when I had real jobs, just walking, talking to different people about opportunities or whatever was going on is very different than today. It feels like I have to intentionally contact somebody if I want to talk. And then it's like I'm interrupting them. It wasn't just a random, let me bump into you in the office space type thing. So it feels very different. It
is. And I don't know how that works long-term, the full remote thing. It just, it's a little weird, but there's companies making it work who are doing a great job. I think for people who, professionals that have been doing this for 10 plus years, it's a little bit easier, but I still think there's some things lost there.
All right. Hey, Jon, we're going to wrap this up. I'm going to slightly change my last question for you. So get ready. I hope you didn't prepare an answer. So here's the last question. What's the one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their career?
That's a great question. Pricing advice. I mean, the way to have a big impact on your career is, like we talked about earlier, is always selling. There's never a perfect solution. There's better and, best. When you have something and you be confident, and don't back down. The greasy wheel, the squeaky wheel gets grease. I mean, it's true in business. The people who move up are people who are adamant. They're persistent. They're not afraid to be uncomfortable in an uncomfortable conversation. So I would say always kind of push when you have something, when you've walked around it, this is the right move. I wouldn't say just run everyone over, but, definitely make your voice heard over and over again if you have to.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to add some nuance around what you just said, and feel free to agree or disagree with what I'm about to say. And that is, we can't always be adamant. We can't assume that we're always right. But once in a while, we find that project, we find that opportunity. We see that it's going to have a huge impact on the company if we push it. And then it's time, right? Take it, go push it, sell it throughout the entire company. And when you're successful with that, it will have a huge impact on your career.
100%. And you don't always, sometimes the traditional channels that you're supposed to go through don't work, and be a little bit more aggressive if you have to. Not all the time. I mean, make sure you're, it's the right one to push, but just don't back down would be my answer. Because a lot of people, people that I know well who are brilliant don't do that enough. And I start coaching them to do that, and suddenly they're getting promotions. And I had one guy reach out to me and say, "Stop giving me advice, Jon." He's like, I don't want any more responsibility. I'm good. I don't want to manage any more people.
I'm making too much money. Leave it alone.
He literally told me that. He's like, it's giving me anxiety. He's like, I'm good. I found the level that I like. I don't want to go any higher. Okay, cool.
All right. Jon, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn, Jon, Jon Jennings. Send me an email, jon@jenningsexec.com. But LinkedIn's the best way. And please reach out. Happy to be kind of career counselor, help you find jobs, help you place people and on your teams. We solve business problems. I don't like to think we just find people. We think about the business problem and then how we can solve it with the right person. And I'd love to have those conversations.
Awesome. Episode 169 is all done. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, would you please leave us a rating and a review? And finally, our goal is to help you win more business at higher prices. So if you have any questions or comments about this podcast or pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact